what tends to happen is sometimes there is one person who feels very anxious in the relationship, in the friendship, and depends on the other person to manage that anxiety. And there is sometimes another person that's completely drained. Like, I drained from all of the care and support they're giving the other individual.
Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Excellent, as always, to have you along. Matt Kaufman is my name. Kathy Knochel, Brian Sutter are with me here today.
Good to be with you, Matt.
Yes.
We're going to talk about emotions and connecting with people emotionally. Okay, so I had Caleb in here some time back, and we talked about emotional affairs, okay? This idea, and I waxed a little scientific and talked about vector forces that are within people. Here, the point is this, that we have an attraction, a force that's directional towards people on the emotional level.
Sure.
Think of it as gravity.
Okay.
There's a gravitas, right? Some people feel that more or less than others. But this idea that we can slide into relationships and we can go deep in relationships, God has created us that in ways, really, really beautiful ways, right? We have not been created to be alone. We've been created for relationship. And I suppose we can pontificate and wax eloquent about the animal kingdom that doesn't have this perhaps same draw of emotional attachment. Now, all the dog lovers out there are like,
Come on.
All right, well, so there is this something really, really holy, really divine within us with this emotional connection. Now, this topic actually came by a way of a listener that said, hey, I would like to hear more about emotional attachment. And she mentioned emotional affairs, but also expanded that beyond just marriage and outside of marriage. So if you think about an emotional affair, you have to have a binding commitment in order to have an affair, right? What does an affair mean if there's not a marriage? So we're clearly talking about emotional connection outside of the marriage bounds. Okay. That's what Caleb talked about. And so I would like to push into this space now about unhealthy emotional bonds between people where there is not an offense to a marriage.
Sure.
You see my space here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Because I think that's what the listener was asking for, and I think it's really, really good. Because there are clear bounds, like in the marriage covenant, like, okay, you're out of bounds. But without the marriage covenant, what is too much emotional attachment? I don't know. So there's the setup. Right.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, which puts us in this position of like, wait a second, is this even a thing? I mean, I think unless you've actually thought about it or found yourself out of bounds, you might be thinking, wait a second, I can't even imagine what this space might look like.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. But this is something you see. Am I right about that?
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And it has some names, I think, psychological names that we could use. So let's just go right into it. You probably have some categories in your head. So how do you want to talk through this?
In a family system, we would call that enmeshment, when everyone is in each other's emotional worlds and there aren't clear boundaries of like, where do you start and I stop?
The word is enmeshment then, right?
Right, and when you're thinking of a family system, when you've got, in one sense, it is one organism, right? In another sense, it's lots of different parts that make up a whole. And so when those different parts that make up the whole are totally lost and it's just the whole, that's where, at least from a psychological or a counseling perspective, we've seen lots of challenges rise out of that.
So I think you've taken a fork in the road. One is you've mentioned family systems. Okay, so would that be one category we think about unhealthy emotional connection?
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure. In the family context, I think outside of that, we would also say there's this space of like emotional dependence, which wouldn't necessarily have to be in a family setting. That could be just between friends, and that would be another category where those boundaries are lost between two people and can create some problems on that end.
Sure. Okay, well, let's go with this family system then. Can you give us an example of like what enmeshment looks like, characteristics?
Well, and when you kind of think of the picture of enmeshment and things being too fused or too like meshed together.
I'm actually thinking of like green and yellow Play-Doh. Mixed together.
Yes. And
which is like all of our Play-Doh at home, like enmeshed.
Yes.
And they have these like sets, like you're supposed to play with Play-Doh, And after you make the spaghetti, how do you actually possibly get it back?
Oh, it's ruined.
Yes.
Have I digressed?
No, but I would say what we see with this is it's the emotions in the family system are the green and yellow Play-Doh mixed together. Sometimes parents' emotions with kids' emotions, siblings' emotions.
And then it's so fascinating. As those emotions get blended, then a lot of things get blended. And so just the idea of like making a decision or having preferences within the system as far as like what you would prefer versus somebody else.
So what would decision-making look like in an unhealthy, enmeshed family system?
Well, I think for a lot of us, we would think, okay, what is it that I'm interested in? What are biblical principles that I might be thinking about? And so you're starting to think through these different categories. But when you're in a meshed system, those categories take a back seat to what would the family say, or what would, mom say, or what would dad say.
So you lose independence.
Right, yeah. You lose independence and you lose kind of some of those categories, and it's just thinking about what would the system itself say, and that's the primary driver, which then is really hard because if you get it wrong, then that's really scary. There might be big consequences from that, and therefore a lot of times you get paralyzed with decision making.
Okay.
And we've talked before about like the need for like exploration of identity. There is no exploration of identity in an enmeshed family system, because if someone explores and goes a different way than the other sibling, what the parents thought was appropriate, then it's like the system feels like it's going to collapse.
And like you mentioned earlier, Kathy, like there's this emotional, those get blended up. So in the background, you're always thinking like, if I do this, how will that emotionally impact somebody else? And you can't always predict that, but it's like, oh man, I don't want to do the thing that might make them upset. And then again, it just makes everything really...
So now you take responsibility for another person's emotional reaction.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and again, you can see that sometimes in if I do this makes, which can be something very healthy and okay, but this causes mom or dad to feel this way. So I have to not do, or I have to make sure and do in order to keep this person emotionally healthy, right? Where a parent is responsible for their own emotions. Yeah.
And I appreciate it, which sounds healthy. There is at a level of, man, that sounds like good social awareness, being able to read the room,
yes.
Which is healthy. But what I heard you say there, Kathy, is you are then take responsibility for another person's emotional well-being. And now there's a dependence there.
Yes.
Unhealthy dependence?
And I think you're right there, Matt, that it's a little bit nuanced and it's a little bit hard to put your finger on. But I think one of the other kind of factors that comes into play here is that in a healthy system, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to make this. That's probably not going to be the other person's preference, but I think we'll be able to work through it and it'll be fine. But in an enmeshed system, it's like, if I do this, it's going to, blow the whole system up. I don't know that we'll recover.
Mm-hmm. And what I see is, I think sometimes enmeshed family systems, it looks like love. It looks like they are so close, they do everything together, but it's not because that is the preference. It's that we're locked into this. Like we have to do the same things. We have to be on the same page with things, or else it's chaos, or we can't exist.
It's not a free
right.
of giving myself to the family system in terms of a free love.
Right.
It's a binding love,
right,
quote unquote.
Yes, and then it's really fragile and it feels really risky, and so there's a lot of anxiety and even bitterness or anger that can be part of the system that, and it gets scary.
So what kind of blows things up? I mean, I'm sure that's probably what you see. It doesn't come into the office until something's really going off the rails.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right?
I think I see a lot of anxiety within someone. And as you kind of peel back the layers, you realize that some of the anxiety they're holding is everybody within their family system's opinions, needs, fears of like, are they okay? Is it okay if I do this? Are they going to get mad? So I think one of the things is anxiety that you see kind of overwhelm someone.
Yeah, and I think for us, a lot of times that's how we see it. It's not necessarily there's been a big blow up, But as we start to dig around underneath the
There's a very
anxiety,
tired person.
exactly.
That's a good
Yep,
word.
Yep. On the other side of things, certainly there are times where, like, oh, all of a sudden there's just been this kind of big fight in the family or a big blow up. That can be certainly a catalyst. Let's say somebody decides, oh, I'm going to go to college when, the family system has been, nope, you're just part of the farm. That's what you do at this stage in life. Somebody breaks the family rules, so to speak, and that certainly can happen as well.
How do you coach an enmeshed family become not enmeshed when you have multiple players here, right? Because you're probably seeing one person.
Yeah, it's hard. And I think the goal of it is not to try and get the family to a place where there is super rigid boundaries, where it's like we don't interact at all with each other. Like the end goal is still a connected family, but it's a connected family where each person can be their own individual.
Because I think in many ways, enmeshment is on, one extreme of the spectrum. The other would be detached. So you've got a family that's everybody's totally independent. They don't think about the other parts of the family at all. And so trying to figure out what a healthy mesh is really the idea.
Is there a tendency to whiplash, go from one to the other?
Oh, I think so. I think, and that's almost always even the tendency when we're talking about the concept of boundaries in general, which is a big part of the work here. When somebody comes in and they don't have any boundaries and they hear the concept of boundaries and they're thinking about, oh, okay, I need to have, what do I think and what do I want? And I get to say no. You can have a strong kind of swing to the other extreme and say, well, actually, let's figure out what this looks like over time to settle in.
I think one of the other core elements is so if only one person in the family system is recognizing, hey, there's enmeshment, right? Some of the work is helping each family member arrive at that, which if you're only working with one part of the system, then that doesn't always happen. It's different if you're doing like a whole family like counseling piece, but if it's just one part of the system, some of it is like first helping them recognize it. Secondly, start to talk about boundaries piece. And then as the person sets boundaries, there's going to be a natural guilt feeling there or unsettling. And I think in there, the need to just slowly like utilize good distress tolerance as boundaries are put in slowly would be kind of the recommendation I would have for the person.
Yeah, but I appreciate you mentioning there's that guilt phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in that, part of, with a lot of the work we do, we're trying to figure out what is the meaning that we put to things and to be able to say, actually, we want the other people in the system to see that you're doing this not because you're trying to be mean, not because you're trying to totally distance yourself from the family system. It's more like, no, this is maybe more where God's created you, and just even thinking the picture in the scripture of the body, that you've got the foot and the hand, and we don't need everybody to be a hand. And sometimes if everybody's a hand and you said, no, I think I'm going to be the foot, like that can be really scary for the family, or feel like, oh man, we've done everything wrong, or they don't like us at all, or they don't value us at all. And being able to say, wait, no, that's not what we're saying.
I'm not abandoning the body, I'm finding my place.
Exactly.
Okay, so here's interesting. So you mentioned guilt, and that makes sense from the person who understands the enmeshment coming and saying, we need to step out of this. One of the light bulb moments that I had with Caleb is he mentioned that in the emotional affair, there needs to be a grieving process of that spouse that went outside, okay? Because that is a relationship that is a loss as much as it needs to be cut off. I'm wondering what the other side perspective, and maybe it's grief on that side too, right? There's the guilt, I'm pulling out of this, and that's going to really put mom in a bad place. And what does health look like for mom? Is there a grieving that mom needs to do? Like, is that part of, she's not going to feel guilt necessarily. She's going to feel grief? Is that, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think so. There's certainly going to be loss there, because the vision of what you think family is, or what you thought this was going to look like as children age and things, that's going to look different if somebody starts to kind of step out of that. And there is going to be a loss in trying to work through that and grieving that. And two, for them to see that, I think, over time, hopefully, as an opportunity for them to learn how to recognize their emotions and process them in healthy ways for both individual, that would be an important part of the journey.
And I see grief as like the guilt, the grief, and I think fear is the other emotion that you have to kind of make room for, because so if how things have been is not healthy, what is it going to look like? Or who are we as a family? And so I think like a fear response doesn't mean, a fear response is not a bad response, but it has to be stewarded well.
If you go back to the decision situation, making decisions by myself can be fearful.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? When now all of a sudden the system is not doing that.
Yeah. And in that too, then you don't have the protection of, oh, this is just how we do it. And then if it doesn't turn out, we're in this together. You're kind of deviating from that, which is like, boy, if I get this wrong or it doesn't go really well, they're all going to be able to say, I told you so. And so, yeah, that's tricky.
Okay. Family systems, enmeshment. How about non-family systems, right? As sovereign human beings, we have this force within us towards relationship and emotional connection with people. What does it look like? I mean, here again, there's this gray area from increasing health to all of a sudden increasing ill health on that spectrum, being connected with another person emotionally. So I'm picturing friends, really, really tight and close friends. Is there a warning ever? You know what I mean? And I think that actually is the question of my listener.
Yeah. Yeah, I would certainly say there is, Matt, because a healthy friendship is two people that are where it's like an equal relationship. Like we enjoy being with each other. If I'm having a bad day, I'll ask, like, can we talk? And that friend can support, right? There's an equal level of support. When it turns unhealthy, what I see is possibly one of the two is overly dependent on the other one. I'm having a bad day. This person needs to fix it. Or both are overly dependent on each other, on the relationship.
Yeah. And I think even one of the things that makes me think of is one of my kids tends to be pretty empathetic and pretty relational. And so they would have a pretty strong tendency towards recognizing what their friends are feeling through the day and then feeling responsible to make sure that they're having a good day at school. And so that would be a personality that would be pretty easy, could move into being emotionally dependent or letting everybody be emotionally dependent on you. Both sides of that is really hard.
Yeah. There's something interesting you said there, Kathy, it talks about dependence on one another, and how you mentioned friendship is, I forget how you said it, but the picture that I had in mind is kind of beautifully free. Friendships are free. Friendships are unique, even beyond marriage. Friendships are unique in that there are no strings attached. It's like, I'm here because I want to be here, and you're here because you want to be here.
Right.
We get together because we both want to be here.
Yeah.
And there's no strings keeping you here, which actually makes for like a really, really beautiful friendship. Right. It sounds to me strings start to get attached, and that might be a sign.
Yes. Yeah, because the more two people get to know each other, the more the friendship grows. It's easy for, conversations to get deeper and deeper, and then the level of intimacy between the two people increases. And then there's always a risk of dependence based on how the level of like emotional intimacy is between people.
Yeah. And I think interesting too, when that happens and it's kind of each individual or one of the other have a difficult time making space for that a healthy relationship, a deep relationship is going to have disappointment as part of it, is going to have disagreement as part of it. There's going to be some conflict. If those things can't be part of that emotional depth, then that sets the relationship on really shaky foundation, because as you grow in emotional intimacy, those sorts of things are going to start to show up too. And if you can't trust, they're going to be okay. They can navigate through this. Yeah, we're in a little bit of a disagreement here, but we're going to come out on the other side. If we don't have that, it gets really uncomfortable and set up for failure.
You both use this word intimacy, which I think is a great word, and it's a great God word. Into me, you see, in this kind of vulnerability. And intimacy is a whole spectrum and looks like a lot of things. And we're talking about emotional intimacy. Does this emotional intimacy? I'm wondering if one of the hallmarks of we're not perhaps healthy. Does that emotional intimacy blend and move into physical intimacy? Is that a thing that could happen?
It certainly can. Yes. And I would say that it is the physical part comes from the too much, to your example, like too many strings attached, and this is my person, and we need each other for our emotional well-being. And I think that it doesn't always, but it can certainly lead down a path of physical boundaries being crossed.
Which I think brings up another point there, Kathy, that as you move into an emotionally dependent relationship, one of the characteristics of that is that you look to the other person to fill every need that you have. And so then it moves beyond just the emotional support and into physical and so on.
So I'm just going to throw this out there because this is in my head. We live in a world right now that is naming everything, right? And one of the names we throw out in terms of sexual orientation to say, if you are oriented this way, that means you must be gay or a lesbian or bisexual. And I'm wondering if this is conflated in this natural human interaction, right? I have two girls are great friends, right? They have emotional connection. They're on an intimacy spectrum. Is there a place for confusion in misunderstanding ourselves in moments like this to say, I must be, when no, I'm just inappropriately emotionally connected. Is that a fair observation?
Oh, absolutely. I think you're exactly right. I think it even shows up even in, just the natural development of kids. If we're talking about younger kids, like you don't know even what physical attraction is, or, sexual orientation. And you've got this really good friend and like, oh, well, maybe that means that I'm, homosexual or whatever, that is a very common thing in today's world, that kids get confused because they confuse close friendship with, well, that maybe means. And then as they move into, a young adulthood and those relationships expand. And if you've got that category of, oh, this means this, that connection gets made, and then a lot of confusion comes.
I think that's really interesting. Emotional connection happening in our growth much earlier than a physical one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's important, right?
Oh, I think
to recognize that about what being human means in the human experience.
Oh, yes. No, I think so.
Okay. I think that this is fair to say, but I'm going to say this and you guys correct it. I think, too, this can get especially tricky with females being a strong desire to have emotional needs met. I can see this in middle school girls, right? Like middle school boys are not meeting any emotional needs for girls. And so that confusion can happen there. But then all the way up into young adulthood, I would say specifically when marriage is not happening for someone, I think that it is easy to find a person that can appropriately meet emotional needs for you, right? So their friendship is very needed and appropriate, but it can so quickly become too attached, too close, and then that is where the fear of physical boundaries being.
I appreciate you saying that, Kathy, and I think if we were to look at bell curves and norms, females tend to be more emotionally astute, emotionally connective than the male counterpart.
And I think to that point, and correct me if you would feel otherwise, Kathy, but I think sometimes with females in those relationships and connecting with another female who is more emotionally astute, there's something really like enjoyable and preferred. And then they get into this relationship with a male who's, focused on the physical piece. Like that's really off-putting. And then it's like, wait, why wouldn't I just come over here? And that dynamic can really fuel some of this.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. I would imagine as we talked about the family system, the off-ramp was boundaries. was experiencing guilt and also some grief, and working through that to find your appropriate place in the system. I would imagine there's something somewhat corollary here. To get to what place? Maybe I'll say that. To reorient it into a friendship? Is that the end?
I think it depends on maybe how unhealthy it's been or how many boundaries have been crossed. Sometimes it is just getting to a more boundaried place to be able to manage just a friendship again. Sometimes it is the loss of that because there's been too much collateral in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's painful.
Thanks, both of you. I think this is really, really healthy. I think it's really, really, really helpful to think through some of the categories that you've supplied, and also appreciate you bringing this concept to the forefront so that we can see it. And I trust to our listeners that this has been helpful, enlightening, perhaps put some words to some of the things you've experienced or seen, but also, most importantly, seeing the repair that can happen.
Yeah.
Am I right? There's repair here, right?
Yeah.
To, again, position ourselves in healthy relationships,
right. Yeah.
which is our goal. So thanks, everyone, for being on. God bless you all.